G'day couplers, welcome back to the bush. Actually, my house again today in isolation. In this episode of Lock Your Hubs Four-Wheel Driving, we're going to be checking out the Makita 18 volt blower. We'll be taking it apart and we'll be checking out its performance. And what would you want it for camping anyway? Let's get into it. For starters, let's check out the specs. So it takes one 18 volt Makita battery. In this case, I've got the 6 amp connected to it. We've got a bit of a pull trigger there. There's no lock on. And it's a 3-speed, allegedly out of the end here, 288 kilometers an hour. Now, anyone who's looking up the spec sheet for this one, it's the DUB182Z, or Z, depending on which part of the world you come from. Now, there's supposed to be a vacuum kit that can connect to the inlet port here, and it looks like it's designed to connect something to it, though I've never actually seen one available anywhere. So, without further ado, let's start taking it apart, eh? First up, let's whip out the battery, because that one's actually charged. Now, if you're not sure about the Makita batteries, there's a little battery indicator up the top there, and you can see that one's got 4 lights out of 4, so it's assumingly fully charged. Well, that's what my charger says anyway. We'll take the battery off so we don't get any unnecessary surprises. So let's start ripping it apart. Just normal number 2 Phillips heads here. Now, I probably should take the nozzle off first. There we go. And we'll pull these 2 clamshell pieces apart. Now, here you can see the impeller. It's shaped something similar to a turbocharger inlet impeller or exhaust impeller. And one interesting thing to see here, it seems to have some sort of earth trap running up to there. We'll see what that's connected to in a minute. But we'll rip out the impeller and see what's underneath that one. So it's good to see that's a metal shaft in there with a machine thread, and it looks like the shaft is passing through this clamshell piece here, which we'll rip out now. So as we're pulling it apart, you can actually see all the die markings. Die marking looks really good, so it's all nice and smooth. The dies that it was cast in doesn't look to be worn out at all. So this is a rubber butyl overmolding. Now usually these pieces are reinforced plastic with glass fibre. Now your average tool grade glass fibre is 30%. Here we go, PCGF15. So that's got 15% glass fibre in there, so that's half the usual amount. So yes, it's got reinforced plastic there, but not the usual amount you'd find in, say, this drill, for instance. Okay. Now we're down to the main unit, and we can see the motor here. And so we'll keep going, we'll keep pulling it apart. I think I've missed one. There we go. Let's have a look at the inside of this one for starters. And you can see where the butyl outer rubber moulding joins to the inner clamshell here. And again, it looks like a pretty decent casting. And again, you can see here, GF15. So they've used half the usual amount of glass fibre reinforcement there. So let's have a bit of a closer look. So this is where the power comes in from the battery. Obviously, we've got a positive and negative. You'll notice there's no fancy circuit protection or anything like that. And we're just going into the switch here. Now, there's no bellow on the switch, which isn't fantastic, especially something that's meant to work in a dusty atmosphere like this is. So all we've got is a plain switch entry here, and there's a heatsink on there, and the heatsink tells me that this thing is meant to dissipate heat. Now, the reason is, if you have a look at the speed control here, all it does is physically limit how far you can push in the switch. So on number 3 there, we can push him in all the way, and number 2 there, We can push them in, but not quite all the way. And on number 1 there, we can't push them in too far at all. So that tells me that this switch is able to vary the amount of current that's coming from the battery through to the motor, which we'll have a look at in a moment. It's quite an ingenious way of doing it. It's a lot cheaper than using something like pulse width modulation, or I'm assuming this isn't a brushless motor, but we'll have a look at that in a second. I assume it's a plain old DC brush motor, especially at this price point. So all we've got here is a little spring-loaded dial. And make sure I catch that. So we've got a spring there, and that just loads into these various detents. So we've got 1, 2 and 3 for our various speeds. Moving up towards the motor, we've got a couple of chokes. That'll be for RF interference there. It's wrapped around the wires, and now we'll see if we can pull out the motor. Okay, so let's pull out the motor. Okay, we've got a couple of vibration dampening rubbers on that. Let's see if we can pull off the 2 prongs. As you can see, this one's had a little bit of use. You got to try these things out. There we go. Genuine Australian outback dust on this one. And there's our motor there. So we've just got a positive and negative connection. We'll see if we can have a look at the windings on the inside there. That's about as good as we're going to get. Now you can see the electrical insulated windings in there on the armature. The armature is the bit that spins. It's a permanent magnet DC motor brush. Now, one thing of a concern to me is the brushes, and it's very hard to see, the brushes are located here and here, and they're not actually serviceable. Right, so you might be able to see the comms in there. If not, I'll just put a photo up on the screen now, and I'll take my mobile phone. There's nothing really spectacular about this motor. It's just a normal DC motor. There's actually a number on it, so I'll punch that into the old Google machine and I'll see what it comes up with. Okay, so what I've been able to extrapolate from the Google machine is the motor's obviously a DC brush motor, and it's a multi-voltage motor. It's good for various voltages with different amounts of performance. So at 12 volts, it sucks down 1.5 amps, and it'll do 11,700 RPM. At 14.4 volts, 1.7 amps, and 14 and almost 500 RPM. And at 20 volts, it'll suck down 2.1 amps, and it'll almost do 20,000 RPM. So in between 14.4 and running on 18 volts, it'll do around about, I'd say, 18,000 RPM and chew down just under 2 amps. So it's not serviceable, which is a bit of a bugger, but it's cheap enough. I mean, they're $10 or $15. You can find them on the interweb. Probably cheap enough to just throw away and bung in a new one. Getting this little bit on and off might be a bit of a bear. So let's start throwing it back together again. See if I can get it working. Might even pull apart a battery. That could be interesting. You'll probably see tears when the thing doesn't work eventually. Anyway, that's all right. All in the name of good fun. To put him back together. So where I'd use this thing anyway. So I'll put up a little bit of a video clip. We've used it to get a fire really going. So if we needed some coals for cooking or something like that. And it is polarity sensitive, otherwise it'll suck instead of blow. So I better put the positive on there and the negative on the other side. Don't break it, Simon. I'm giving it a red hot go at breaking it, let me tell you about that. In fact, I'll take that one off again and I'll flatten it out. It's currently more bent. One of my Victorian politicians who said that. Dan wouldn't be like that. or any of his predecessors? I'm sure. Okay. Now, where was our positive side again? There we go. So there's our positive side. Our positive back on. And now click our freshly straightened negative back on. That just bungs in there. We'll line them up. Actually, a couple of wire clamps here to run the wires through. Anyway, back to the story. We'd use this thing for. Where I've used it for previously is when I've wanted to blow off the back of the car. No, not that, so it'll blow off. Using air to get rid of the dust before I open up the back door on the vehicle, because it's full of dust, and then my car gets full of lovely red dust. So I drag out this and I blow down the back of the car around the gaps mainly where the door intersects with the body, and that gets rid of the dust. Also campfires, a bit of damp wood. If you have damp wood in one of these, you don't have a problem with damp wood anymore, let me tell you, they're fantastic. Rightio, now we need to get this mechanism back and working again. Now this goes in some way. Where's our ferrite cores? What else have I used it for? Yeah, damp wood, cleaning off the back of the car, cleaning out the swag. That was a fantastic one. So you can bung it in one side and watch all the rubbish come out the other. Now this is going to be more or less polarity sensitive. We need to go in one way and not the other. And I guarantee you, just as I stand here, I'm going to get it around the wrong way first go. That's inevitable. Now the fun part is going to be getting this to hold down there whilst putting the second half of the clamshell on without it sprunging its way out. And of course you have to make sure the battery connector is back in. Sometimes he smiles down on me, let me tell you. Is that still working? Oh, look at that. Of course I missed one. Now, one thing I was interested in is why exactly we have this steel trace here. That goes back into there, so it earths against the earth of the motor there, of the electric motor. So it's obviously to provide a negative to this part here, perhaps to get rid of static build-up, I'd hazard a guess, because that then connects through to these steel spigots. Are they steel? Yeah, I'm not sure. Probably enough to conduct electricity anyway. But it's probably just to get rid of static build-up on there. Now this allegedly goes back onto here. And there's our impeller. And of course that indexes onto the shaft, which I assume is just an interference fit. So this spigot here is just an interference fit onto the motor. It's not great, but that's alright. It's only a $100 tool. Should be right. Spring washers. What? Why? They just don't do anything. I'll put them back on. Yeah, sure. I'll put them back on. But they're of little to no use. I mean, if you want to lock it down, either use a nylock nut or maybe a Nordlock washer. There we go. Now they do say the proof's in the pudding. Oh, that's not got the casing on there. Let's see if she chooches. Oh, geez. That's going fast enough that I'm actually concerned for my welfare. Okay, I better disconnect the battery. Put the rest of the clamshell back on. Okay, so should all work nicely now. Beauty. Now, I've always been meaning to pull up one of these batteries. I mean, why not? So let's get into that. Okay, so let's have a look at what's inside one of these batteries. Well, this is the 5 amp version. Now, I know this one's not dodgy or aftermarket because, well, it was sent to me by redemption from Makita itself, so hopefully it's an original one. Now, they seem to have, and I'll see if I can get a bit of a close-up here. Now, if you can see in this one here, there's actually a bung in there which prevents you from getting to the T10 Torx, which is behind it. But nothing a drill can't fix, really, so let's drill it out. So we'll just get the drill, and we'll see if we can remove it. There we go, so the bung's out, but they will know that you've been into the battery. That's right, I think they only provide about 3 months worth of warranty on these things anyway. Alright, let's pull all the screws out. And there we go. Now, when you're poking and prodding around one of these things, there's lots of live contacts, and another one for the blokes and the ladies out there, if you've got any jewellery like rings and stuff on your fingers, not a bad idea to tape them up. I don't tend to wear jewellery, I work too much with my hands and I prefer my skin wrapped around my meat as opposed to on the outside of it, so I don't run with jewellery. So here's the battery control module. Now you might be able to see that there's a layer of glue, what looks to be like glue over all the surface mount componentry there. So basically this will prevent charging up at a too high a rate, and when it discharges to a certain amount, it'll stop the battery from putting out any more current, and it protects the batteries. Alright, so we can probably pull it out, we'll have a bit of a look. Okay, so let's see if we can pry it out. There we go. So firstly we have a bit of a look at the casings, and I can't see any markings in there pertaining to if it's got any glass fibre reinforcing in it, but it doesn't actually feel like it, which is a bit of a surprise to me actually. I would have thought these ones being bashed around as they do and they have to sit on them and whatnot with the full weight of the tool underneath, that they would have been 30% glass fibre reinforced. But anyway, I digress. Onto the battery pack. So if we have a look at the batteries in there, there we go. If we can just focus on there now, they're a Samsung battery, and I'll just punch that into the Google machine and see if I can find out exactly how many milliamps they are. Okay, so the Google machine has told me that the INR 25Rs from Samsung are 25 milliamps each. Now, these are 3.7 volt cells, and we've got in total 10 there. So if we put these in series, when you put batteries in series, it just adds the voltage. So 5 times 3.7 will give you about 18.5. So obviously the voltage just runs through there, and then the second pack is in parallel. So it's 2 battery banks of 5 cells in series, which gives us our roughly about 18 volts. Another thing interesting to note here is your battery charge indicator, which tells me I've got 2 out of 4 bar on that one left in my 5 amp battery pack, so she's about half worn down. Alright guys, so that's what's inside the Makita battery pack. And don't forget the powering the old blower there. Now, if you like this video, don't forget to give it the old thumbs up. And if you didn't, by all means, give it a thumbs down. Twice. Thanks guys, we'll see you in the next one. Now I've got to try and get this thing back together.